He was kicked out at 17 with his little sister and nothing but a key from his dead grandfather. What he discovered in the hills wouldn't just save their lives, it would give them a reason to live one. If you've ever felt like the world had given up on you, or if you've ever had to find your own way home, then this story is for you. Stick around and hit that subscribe button, because we don't run from the hard stuff here. We walk right through it, together. The front door clicked shut behind me with a sound so final it felt like a gunshot in the quiet suburban street. It was November, and the air had that sharp, metallic bite that promises a deep cold is coming. I stood on the porch, the single duffel bag at my feet feeling impossibly heavy. Not because of what it held, but because of what it represented. Everything. Everything we had left. A few changes of clothes, a worn paperback, my sister's sketchbook, and the small, polished wooden box our grandfather had given me just before he passed. My sister Maya stood beside me, her arms wrapped around herself. She was 15, but in the harsh porch light, she looked about 10. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and fixed on the closed door, as if she could will it to reopen. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. The silence was roaring between us, filled with the shouting that had just ended. "He didn't mean it," she whispered, her breath turning to a faint cloud in the cold. "Yes, he did, Maya." My voice was flat. I couldn't afford emotion right now. Emotion was a luxury, and we were bankrupt. "He's been meaning it for a long time." Our stepfather, Mark, had been a slow-burning fire since our mom died 2 years ago. At first, it was small things. Complaints about the grocery bills, sighs about the space we took up. Then it grew. The accusations, the resentment that we were a permanent reminder of a life he'd lost, a responsibility he never truly wanted. Tonight, the fire had finally exploded. An argument over nothing, a broken dish, had spiraled into 2 years of pent-up bitterness. He'd pointed a shaking finger at the door and said the words I'd been dreading since the day Mom was gone. "You're 17. You're practically a man. Get out. Take her with you." I looked at Maya, at the slight tremor in her hands. She was trying so hard to be brave, to mirror the blank expression I was forcing onto my own face. But I could see the cracks. I was her big brother. I was supposed to protect her. And I had failed. We were standing on a manicured lawn in a neighborhood where people worried about property values and crabgrass, and we were homeless. I slung the duffel bag over my shoulder. "Come on, let's walk." "Where are we going?" It was the question I didn't have an answer to. My mind was a frantic storm of useless information. We had $74 between us. I had a part-time job washing dishes, but I wouldn't get paid for another week. No friends we could stay with, not for more than a night. Our family was a ghost town, our mom gone, our dad a man we hadn't seen since I was 5, and our grandparents on Mom's side both passed. There was no one, just us. We walked. We didn't look back. Each step away from that house felt like stretching a rubber band tighter and tighter. I was waiting for it to snap, for the sound of the door opening, for Mark's voice calling us back. But there was nothing. Just the rhythmic crunch of our shoes on the fallen leaves and the distant hum of the highway. The streetlights cast long, distorted shadows that seemed to mock us. We ended up at a small park a dozen blocks away, the kind with a sad-looking swing set and a single wooden bench. We sat, the cold of the wood seeping through my thin jeans. The silence stretched. I needed a plan. I needed to be the adult. But my brain was just repeating the same phrase over and over. I'm 17. I'm just 17. Maya finally broke the quiet. What are we going to do, Leo? I looked at her, and the facade I'd been holding up crumbled. The fear I'd been suppressing washed over me in a cold wave. I saw it reflected in her eyes, and that's what did it. I couldn't let her see me break. I had to be the rock. I had to be what Gramps would have been. Gramps. The thought of him was a sharp pang of grief, but it was also something else. A flicker of something solid in the chaos. He was the one who had always made us feel safe. A retired Army engineer, a man who smelled like sawdust and coffee, with hands as rough as bark, but a touch as gentle as anything I'd ever known. After our mom got sick, he was the one who held everything together. When he died 6 months after her, it felt like the last safe harbor in the world had vanished. But he'd left me something. On one of my last visits to his small, cluttered house, he'd pressed a little wooden box into my hand. It was dark, smooth cherry wood, and it felt heavy for its size. "Leo," he'd said, his voice thin, but his grip surprisingly strong. "You listen to me. I hope you never need this. I hope your life is simple and easy. But the world isn't always simple and easy." He'd coughed, a dry, rattling sound. "Don't open it. Not unless you have to. Not unless you find yourself with your back against the wall and nowhere else to go. You'll know when. Just promise me." I'd promised. I hadn't understood, but I'd promised. I thought it was just the rambling of a sick old man. I'd tucked the box away in my duffel bag and mostly forgotten about it. Until now. Our backs were against the wall. There was nowhere else to go. I set the duffel bag on the bench between us and unzipped it. I pushed aside the clothes and pulled out the cherry wood box. It was about the size of a brick. There was no visible lock, just a seamless finish. I ran my fingers over it, feeling a small, almost invisible seam along one edge. "What's that?" Maya asked, leaning closer. "Gramps gave it to me, before he died." I found a tiny indentation and pressed. A section of the lid popped up with a soft click. Inside, nestled in faded red velvet, were 2 things: a heavy, old-fashioned skeleton key made of brass, and a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. My hands were shaking as I unfolded the paper. It wasn't a letter, it was a map. A hand-drawn map, rendered in Gramps' precise architectural script. It showed the roads leading out of our town, heading north into the foothills of the Cascade Mountains. It detailed a route to a specific plot of land, marked with a simple X. There were landmarks noted: the Sleeping Giant rock formation, Split Creek, and a final instruction next to the X. Where the old oak watches the sunrise. Face the light, 10 paces north. Beneath the map, there was a single sentence. "This was your mother's. Now it's yours. A place to stand your ground." I stared at the map, my heart pounding. A place to stand our ground. What did that even mean? I knew Gramps had owned some land up in the hills. He used to talk about it sometimes. A 10-acre plot of nothing but trees and rocks he'd bought for a song decades ago. He'd planned to build a cabin, a retirement project that never happened. I'd always assumed he'd sold it. "What is it?" Maya asked again, her voice hushed. "It's a map," I said, the words feeling heavy and important. "To Gramps' land." She looked from the map to my face, her expression a mixture of confusion and a desperate, fragile hope. "Is there a house there?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "He always talked about building one, but I don't think he ever did." A 10-acre plot of cold, empty woods. It wasn't much, but it was more than this bench. It was somewhere. It was a direction. "We have $74, I said, thinking out loud. "The bus to Pine Ridge is $12 each. That's the closest town on the map. It'll leave us with 50. From there, it looks like a long walk." Maya didn't hesitate. She just nodded. "Okay." That one word, so simple and trusting, settled something in me. The panic receded, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. This was the plan. It was a crazy, desperate plan, but it was the only one we had. We would go to our grandfather's land. We would find whatever was there, and we would figure it out. We spent the rest of the night in the 24-hour bus station, huddled in the uncomfortable plastic chairs under the buzzing fluorescent lights. I bought us 2 lukewarm hot chocolates from a vending machine, and we nursed them for hours. I didn't sleep. I just watched Maya doze with her head on my shoulder, her sketchbook clutched in her lap. I looked at the map again and again, tracing the lines with my finger until I had it memorized. "Where the old oak watches the sunrise." It sounded like something from a fantasy novel, not a set of directions. But it was all we had. The first bus north left at 5:30 a.m. We were the only ones on it besides the driver and a tired-looking woman in a nurse's uniform. I watched out the window as the sky slowly brightened from black to a bruised purple, then to a pale, washed-out gray. The city lights and familiar streets of our old life gave way to strip malls, then sprawling suburbs, and finally the landscape opened up. The houses grew farther apart, replaced by fields and then dense forests of pine and fir. The mountains, which had always been a distant, hazy backdrop to our lives, grew larger and more solid until they filled the entire horizon. It felt like we were traveling to another planet. Every mile the bus rattled down the highway was another mile of the cord being cut. There was no going back. Part of me was terrified, but another, smaller part felt a strange sense of release. We were free. It was a terrifying, dangerous kind of freedom, but it was ours. The bus dropped us off in Pine Ridge just after 7. The town was little more than a wide spot in the road, a gas station, a diner with a flickering neon sign, a general store, and a handful of houses. The air was different here, colder, cleaner, smelling of pine needles and wet earth. A thin mist hung in the air, muffling the sound of our footsteps on the cracked pavement. According to the map, we needed to follow the old logging road that snaked up into the hills east of town. It was a 5-mile walk, maybe more. I bought a couple of bottles of water and a bag of trail mix from the general store, spending 6 of our remaining $50. The woman behind the counter gave us a long, curious look, but didn't say anything. We probably looked like what we were, runaways. The logging road was more of a dirt track, rutted and washed out in places. The climb was gradual at first, then grew steeper. The woods pressed in on either side, a dense wall of green and brown. It was quiet. The only sounds were the cawing of crows, the rustle of our own feet, and the thumping of my heart in my chest. Maya, who usually chattered constantly, was silent, her eyes scanning the trees. After what felt like an eternity, we found the first landmark Gramps had marked, a massive, moss-covered boulder shaped vaguely like a person lying on their side. The sleeping giant. My breath caught in my throat. It was real. The map was real. A surge of hope, sharp and painful, went through me. We kept walking, following the creek bed as the map instructed. An hour later, we found the second landmark, a place where the creek forked around a small island of rocks. Split Creek. We were close. My legs ached, and my shoulder was raw from the strap of the duffel bag. Maya was starting to lag, her face pale with exhaustion. "Just a little farther," I promised, though it was as much for me as for her. The map said the property line was marked by an old barbed wire fence 100 yards past the creek. We found it, rusted and half swallowed by the undergrowth, exactly where it was supposed to be. We had arrived. I looked around. It was 10 acres of trees and rocks and ferns. A steep, wooded hillside with no sign of any clearing, any path, any structure at all. A wave of despair washed over me. What was I thinking? That we'd find some cozy, forgotten cabin? We were in the middle of nowhere with no shelter, and night was coming. "Leo?" Maya's voice was small. "Is this it?" "This is it," I said, trying to keep my own disappointment out of my voice. "Now we just have to find the oak tree." We searched for another hour, pushing through thorny bushes and stumbling over hidden roots. The light was beginning to fade, the sun dipping below the tall peaks to the west. Panic was starting to set in. Maybe the tree had fallen down decades ago. Maybe the whole thing was a wild goose chase, a dying man's fantasy. And then Maya saw it. "Leo, look!" She was pointing up the slope. About 50 feet above us stood a colossal oak tree, far older and larger than any of the surrounding pines. Its branches were bare, twisted into gnarled shapes against the darkening sky. It stood on a small, relatively flat patch of ground, perfectly positioned to catch the first rays of the morning sun, where the old oak watches the sunrise. We scrambled up the hill, our breath coming in ragged gasps. We stood under its massive branches, catching our breath. The air was still. I looked at the instructions again. Face the light. 10 paces north. Facing east, where the sun would rise, I took 10 deliberate, careful paces. I ended up in a small, dense thicket of ferns and salal bushes. There was nothing there, just dirt and leaves. My heart sank. It was over. It was all for nothing. I was about to turn, to tell Maya we needed to try and get back to town before it was completely dark, when my foot hit something hard beneath the layer of damp earth and fallen leaves. Not a rock. It was flat, metallic. I dropped to my knees and started digging with my bare hands, tearing at the dirt and roots. Maya knelt beside me, helping. The cold mud seeped into my jeans, but I didn't care. We clawed away the earth, revealing a dark green rectangular shape. It was a steel plate, about 3 feet by 4 feet, with a heavy, recessed handle in the center. It was flush with the ground, and so covered in moss and grime that it was almost perfectly camouflaged. A bunker. He'd built a bunker. My mind reeled. Gramps had been an engineer, a man who believed in planning, in contingencies. A man who had lived through wars and economic collapses. A man who didn't trust the world to be simple and easy. I grabbed the brass key from my pocket. It fit perfectly into a keyhole near the handle that I hadn't noticed before. I turned it. There was a loud, satisfying clunk of a heavy lock disengaging. I gripped the handle with both hands and pulled. Nothing. It was incredibly heavy, sealed tight by years of dirt and rust. "Together," I grunted. Maya grabbed the handle with me. We planted our feet and pulled with everything we had. For a moment, it didn't budge. Then, with a deep groan of protesting metal, the hatch lifted an inch. A puff of stale, cold air escaped, smelling of damp concrete and ozone. We pulled again, and the hatch swung open on a heavy, well-oiled hinge, revealing a dark, square opening and a steep metal ladder leading down into blackness. We stood there, panting, staring into the void. It was terrifying, but it was also the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. It was a door, a way in. We didn't have a flashlight, but my cheap phone had a weak one. I switched it on, its beam cutting a pathetic swath through the oppressive darkness. "Stay here," I told Maya. "Let me check it out first." "No," she said, her voice firm. "We go together." I didn't argue. I went first, climbing down the cold rungs of the ladder. The air grew colder and staler with each step. My feet hit a solid concrete floor about 12 feet down. I shone my phone light around. We were in a small, square room, maybe 15 by 15 feet. The walls, floor, and ceiling were all bare, poured concrete. It was utterly empty except for a single, heavy steel door on the far wall. It had a wheel on it, like a submarine hatch. Maya came down the ladder behind me. Her footsteps echoed in the silent chamber. "Gramps was intense," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "He was an engineer," I replied, though that didn't feel like a complete explanation. This was more than just engineering. This was paranoia. Or foresight. I walked to the steel door and grabbed the wheel. It was stiff, but it turned. With each rotation there was a series of clanking sounds as locking bolts retracted within the door. When it stopped turning, I pulled. The door swung inward with a surprising lack of noise, revealing another room beyond. This one was different. This was the living space. It wasn't large, but it was meticulously organized. Against one wall were two metal-framed cots with thin mattresses and neatly folded wool blankets. Against another, floor-to-ceiling wooden shelves were packed with supplies. I shone my light on the labels. Canned vegetables, fruits, meats. Huge bags of rice and beans. Boxes of dried milk, coffee, sugar. There were first aid kits, tools, batteries, lanterns, a 2-burner camp stove with several canisters of propane. In the corner, several large blue plastic barrels were stacked, labeled potable water. It was a time capsule, a fallout shelter, a promise of survival. On the wall near the entrance was a light switch. I flicked it, not expecting anything. But with a low hum, a single bare bulb in the ceiling flickered to life, casting a stark yellow light over the entire room. There was a bank of deep-cycle marine batteries in the corner, hooked up to a small, silent inverter. He had thought of everything. Maya let out a shaky breath, a sound that was half sob, half laugh. "Oh my God, Leo." We walked through the small space in a daze, touching the cans, running our hands over the rough wool blankets. It was real. It was all real. He had built this for us. He must have. Or at least for someone. A last resort. A place to go when there was nowhere else. Then I saw it. Sitting in the center of a small metal table, right under the light, was a large olive-drab metal footlocker. It had our mother's name stenciled on the side in white paint. Sarah. My hands felt clumsy as I undid the latches. I lifted the heavy lid. Inside, on top of a pile of neatly folded clothes that must have been our mother's, was a thick manila envelope with my name on it. Leo. I picked it up. My name in his handwriting. It was like hearing his voice again. I sat down on one of the cots, Maya settling beside me, her shoulder pressed against mine. I carefully opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of papers, at least 20 pages, filled with his dense, slightly slanted script. I took a deep breath and began to read aloud. "My dearest Leo," the letter began. "If you are reading this, then the world has not been simple and easy for you, and for that I am more sorry than I can ever say. I am sorry I am not there to help you through it. I am sorry for whatever circumstances led you to this door. I built this place a long time ago, back when the world seemed like it was on the verge of flying apart. I hoped it would be nothing more than a monument to an old soldier's paranoia. But I kept it. I maintained it, because I saw the man your mother married. I saw the weakness in him, the resentment that was like a poison in his heart. I had to stop, my throat thick. Maya squeezed my arm. I cleared my throat and continued. I tried to convince your mother to leave him, but she loved him, or at least she loved the man she thought he was. After she got sick, I knew I was running out of time. I couldn't stand the thought of you and your sister being left alone with him. So I made a plan. This place is yours. The deed to the land is in the file folder at the bottom of this box. It was your mother's, and now it passes to you. It's not much, just 10 acres of rock and tree, but it's paid for. It's a piece of the world that belongs to you, and no one can take it away. There are enough supplies here to last 2 people for at least a year. There is a hand pump well for water just outside the hatch, under the flat rock that looks like a turtle. The instructions are in the tool chest. The generator is in the outer chamber, behind the false panel on the west wall. Use it sparingly. There is also a small amount of cash in this envelope, $5,000. It's not a fortune, but it should be enough to help you get on your feet, to use when you have to deal with the world outside. Use it wisely. Do not trust banks. Do not trust anyone you don't have to. $5,000. I reached into the envelope and pulled out a thick stack of $50 bills. I'd never seen so much money in my life. It felt unreal. Leo, this is not a home. It's a shelter, a starting point, a place to be safe while you figure out what comes next. The world can be a hard place, but it is also full of good people and unexpected beauty. Don't let this concrete box become your prison. Your mother loved the sunrise. She would have wanted you to see it every day. This place is underground, but it's meant to help you find your way back into the light. Be good to your sister. Protect each other. You are all you have now, and that is a bond stronger than steel. I have loved you both more than you will ever know. I wish I could have given you a better world. All I could give you was a chance to survive this one. Now it's up to you. Stand your ground. Be brave. All my love, Gramps. I finished reading, and the letter fell from my fingers onto the cot. The room was silent except for the low hum of the inverter. The weight of his words, the sheer depth of his love and foresight, was overwhelming. He had seen this coming. He had spent years and who knows how much money building a lifeboat for us, hoping we'd never have to use it. I looked at Maya. Tears were streaming down her face, but she was smiling. It was a watery, broken-hearted smile, but it was real. He didn't forget us, she whispered. No, I said, my own voice cracking. He never did. We both cried then. We cried for our grandfather, for the love we had lost. We cried for our mother. We cried for the last 2 years of walking on eggshells, of feeling unwanted in our own home. And we cried with a relief so profound it felt like a physical weight being lifted off our chests. We weren't homeless. We weren't alone. We had this. We had a place to stand our ground. That first night, we didn't even bother with the canned food. We were too emotionally exhausted to eat. We just unrolled the wool blankets, which smelled faintly of cedar and mothballs, and lay down on the cots. For the first time in 2 years, I fell asleep without a knot of anxiety in my stomach. The silence of the bunker was absolute. A deep, comforting quiet that soaked into my bones. There were no footsteps in the hall, no angry muttering from the living room, no threat of the world intruding. We were safe. The next few weeks passed in a strange, surreal blur. We fell into a new kind of routine, dictated by the simple realities of survival. We found the well pump, and after a lot of rusty squeaking and hard work, we managed to get a stream of clear, ice-cold water. We learned how to operate the propane stove, making simple meals of rice and canned stew that tasted like the most delicious food on earth. We explored every inch of the bunker, familiarizing ourselves with our inheritance. It was small, but it was ours. During the day, we'd open the hatch to let in fresh air and a sliver of daylight. We'd sit on the hillside under the great oak, and Maya would sketch the trees, the mountains, the shapes of the clouds. She hadn't used her sketchbook in months. Seeing her draw again, seeing the life come back into her eyes, was like watching a flower bloom in slow motion. I would read. Gramps had stocked a small shelf with books, survival guides, engineering manuals, but also classics. Hemingway, Steinbeck, Thoreau. I read about men at war, men on the road, men living in the woods, and I felt a strange kinship with them. We talked more than we had in years. We talked about Mom, sharing memories we'd both been too scared to voice before. We talked about Gramps. We talked about the future, not with the frantic desperation of two kids on a park bench, but with the quiet contemplation of people who actually had one. But beneath the surface of this new, peaceful existence, a question lingered. What now? This bunker was a miracle, a reprieve. But Gramps himself had said it wasn't a home. It was a shelter. We couldn't stay hidden in a hole in the ground forever. The $5,000 was a safety net, but it wouldn't last forever. I was still 17. Maya was 15. We needed to finish school. We needed a plan. The outside world felt like a distant, threatening entity. The thought of going back to it, of dealing with social services, of being separated and put into the foster system was a terrifying prospect. Here we were in control. Out there, we were victims. The bunker, which was meant to be a starting point, was beginning to feel like a destination. A safe, concrete womb I never wanted to leave. I found myself growing more and more protective, more and more insular. I'd make the 2-hour walk into Pine Ridge once a week for fresh supplies we couldn't get from a can, like milk and bread, always paying with cash, always feeling the suspicious eyes of the locals on me. I'd buy a newspaper and read about the world, and it just reinforced my desire to stay hidden. It was a world of problems we didn't have to deal with. Maya was the one who started to push back. "We can't just stay here forever, Leo," she said one afternoon as we were clearing some of the brush around the dilapidated cabin that stood above ground. It was a wreck, the roof half caved in, but we'd started trying to clean it up, to make the land feel more like ours. "Why not?" I countered, a little too defensively. "We're safe here. We have everything we need." "We have cans of beans," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "We don't have a life. I want to go back to school. I want to see friends. I don't want to live in a basement for the rest of my life, even if it's a really well-stocked one." I knew she was right, but admitting it felt like a betrayal of the safety we'd found. It felt like stepping off a lifeboat into a stormy sea. The argument hung between us, unresolved. Have you ever been given a lifeline that was also the scariest thing you've ever seen? A choice that was both a blessing and a burden? Sometimes the safest path isn't the one that leads you where you need to go. If you know what I'm talking about, let me know in the comments. It really helps to know you're not alone in these impossible moments. The world forced our hand about a month after we arrived. I had gone to check the old, rusted mailbox that stood at the edge of the property by the logging road, something I rarely did. It was usually empty, But that day, a single crisp white envelope was wedged inside. It wasn't from the post office. It had been placed there by hand. It was addressed to current landowner. My hands felt cold as I tore it open. The letterhead was from a company called Pioneer Development Group. It was a form letter, cold and corporate. It talked about their interest in acquiring land in the area for a new resort community. It mentioned our specific parcel number and made a cash offer. $10,000 for 10 acres. The number seemed insultingly low, but then I read the last paragraph. As you may be aware, it read, the property taxes on this parcel are currently 3 years delinquent. If the outstanding balance of $4,872 is not paid in full within 60 days, the county will place a lien on the property, and it will be scheduled for a foreclosure auction. Our offer of $10,000 would be sufficient to settle this debt and provide you with a modest profit. This is our final offer. I read it 3 times. The words swam in front of my eyes. Foreclosure. Auction. The ground, which had felt so solid beneath my feet for the past month, suddenly felt like it was about to give way. This place, our sanctuary, the one thing in the world that was ours, we were about to lose it. The $5,000 Gramps had left us would just barely cover the back taxes. It would leave us with nothing. We'd be right back where we started, homeless, but this time in the middle of the woods with no money and no hope. Pioneer Development's $10,000 offer was a lifeline, a cruel, meager lifeline, but one we could use to get a bus ticket somewhere, rent a cheap apartment for a few months, and try to start over. It was the sensible option, the easy way out. I walked back to the bunker in a daze, the letter crumpled in my fist. I showed it to Maya. I watched her face fall, the light that had returned to her eyes dimming once again. "So we have to sell," she said, her voice flat. I think so," I stammered. "We can't pay the taxes, Maya, not without using every penny Gramps left us." "But he said it was ours," she said, her voice rising with a desperate anger. "He said to stand our ground." "He also said the bunker wasn't a home," I shot back, my own fear and frustration boiling over. "He said it was a starting point. Maybe this is what he meant. We sell, we take the money, and we start somewhere else." We fought then, for the first time since we'd arrived. It was a bitter, desperate argument, fueled by terror. Maya accused me of giving up. I accused her of not being realistic. We were just 2 scared kids, and the weight of it all was crushing us. That night we slept with a cold distance between us. I lay awake on my cot, staring at the concrete ceiling, the developer's letter on the table between us like a ticking bomb. Selling was the logical choice. So why did it feel so wrong? Why did it feel like I was betraying my grandfather, my mother, everything he had done for us? Stand your ground. The words echoed in my head. But how could we stand our ground when we didn't have the ammunition to fight? I couldn't sleep. I got up and went to the metal footlocker, needing to feel some connection to Gramps, to his certainty. I ran my hands over the things inside. The deed to the land, his letter. I picked up the thick envelope the money had come in. It felt lumpy. I reached inside and felt a false bottom. My fingers fumbled with a cardboard tab, and the bottom of the envelope came loose. Tucked inside was another, smaller envelope, sealed with wax, and on the front, a single, stark instruction in my grandfather's hand. "Read this if they come for the land." My heart hammered against my ribs. He knew. He knew this would happen. I broke the seal. Inside was another letter and a key. Not a brass skeleton key, but a small, modern silver key. The kind you'd use for a safe deposit box or a small lockbox. "Maya," I whispered, shaking her shoulder. "Wake up." She sat up, her eyes puffy from crying. I showed her the envelope. We sat together on her cot, and under the single bare bulb, I read the second letter. "Leo," it began, and this time the tone was different, harder, angrier. "If you are reading this, it means the vultures have started to circle. I'm talking about pioneer development. I have been fighting them for the last 10 years of my life. They are a cancer on this part of the state, preying on people, buying up land for pennies on the dollar, using threats and legal loopholes. They tried to get this land from me. Now they are trying to get it from you. Do not sell. I repeat, do not sell. That $10,000 they offered you is an insult. This land is worth more than you can imagine. Not for the timber, not for the view, for what's under it." About 15 years ago, I discovered a deep, natural spring on the north end of the property. The water is purer than anything you can get out of a bottle. A geological survey I commissioned confirmed it. It's a significant aquifer. That's what Pioneer wants. They want to buy it for nothing, then sell the water rights for millions. I paused, my mind reeling. Water rights. Aquifer. These were concepts from a world I didn't understand. I kept reading. They cannot be allowed to have it. They will destroy this land, and they will steal what is rightfully yours. I was building a case against them, but my time ran out. Everything you need to continue the fight is here. This is your true inheritance, Leo. Not a shelter, but a battle, a righteous one. In the floor of the bunker, under my cot, there is a loose tile. The key in this envelope opens the safe cemented into the foundation beneath it. Inside you will find two things: enough money to pay the back taxes 100 times over, and a file. That file contains all my research, the original survey, my correspondence with geologists, and my documentation of Pioneer's predatory tactics against our neighbors. There is a name in that file: Arthur Vance. He's a lawyer in the city, an old army buddy. He's the only lawyer I ever trusted. Call him. Show him the file. He'll know what to do. This will not be easy. They will fight you. They will try to intimidate you. But everything your mother and I ever stood for is tied up in this piece of earth. Don't let them take it. This is your home. Fight for it. Now go make me proud. Gramps. I looked at Maya. Her face was a mask of disbelief and fierce, blazing hope. We scrambled to my cot and pushed it aside. I ran my hands over the concrete floor. One of the tiles, a perfectly square section, felt different. It shifted under my fingers. Using a crowbar from the tool chest, I pried it up. Beneath it was a small black metal door, the kind you see on a floor safe. The small silver key fit perfectly. I turned the key, and with a soft click, the safe opened. Inside, stacked in neat, vacuum-sealed plastic bricks, was cash. More money than I could possibly comprehend. And underneath it, a thick, worn leather portfolio. The file. We didn't count the money right away. We just stared at it, a silent testament to our grandfather's planning, his anger, his love. He hadn't just given us a place to hide. He had given us a sword and a shield. He had given us a choice. Not a choice between running and surrendering, but a choice to stay, to fight. I looked at Maya, and I didn't have to ask. I saw the answer in her eyes. It was the same answer that was burning in my own chest. "Okay, Gramps," I whispered into the quiet of the bunker. "Let's go make you proud." The next morning, everything was different. The fear was still there, a low hum beneath the surface, but it was overshadowed by a powerful, electrifying sense of purpose. We weren't hiding anymore. We were preparing for a war. The first step was to pay the taxes. I took one of the bricks of cash. It was $10,000, and we made the trip into the county seat, a larger town about an hour's drive from Pine Ridge. I paid a guy in the diner parking lot $200 to drive us there and back, no questions asked. Walking into the county clerk's office in my worn jeans and hoodie and placing nearly $5,000 in cash on the counter was one of the most terrifying and empowering moments of my life. The clerk looked at me like I was a ghost, but she took the money, stamped our papers, and just like that, the immediate threat of foreclosure was gone. The land was ours, secure. The second step was calling the lawyer, Arthur Vance. His number was on a business card clipped to the inside of the portfolio. I used a payphone in town, my hand shaking as I dialed. I expected a secretary, a runaround, but a gruff, older voice answered on the second ring. "Vance?" Hello?" I stammered. "My name is Leo. My grandfather his name was Michael Adler. He told me to call you." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Mike?" the voice said, softer now. "Mike passed over a year ago, son. What is this about?" "It's about his land," I said, my voice gaining confidence. "It's about pioneer development. He left me a file." Another pause, longer this time. I could hear him breathing. "Where are you?" he finally asked. I met him 2 days later at a coffee shop halfway between the city and us. He was a tall man in his 70s with a shock of white hair and eyes that seemed to see right through you. He looked like he was carved from the same tough, stubborn wood as my grandfather. I handed him the leather portfolio. He opened it and spent the next hour reading in complete silence, his expression growing grimmer with each page he turned. When he finally looked up, he closed the portfolio and slid it back across the table to me. "Your grandfather," he said, his voice heavy with respect, "was one stubborn son of a bitch." He looked me straight in the eye. Pioneer has been trying to bury this for years. They thought with Mike gone, it was over. They didn't count on him having a grandson just as stubborn as he was. "I'm not stubborn," I said. "I'm just all out of other options." He gave a short, dry laugh. "That's when people get stubborn. Son, your grandfather didn't just leave you a file. He left you a winning hand. This geological survey is ironclad, and these testimonies he collected from other families they pushed out. It's a pattern of predatory acquisition. We're not just going to stop them from taking your land. We're going to take them to court for what they did to your neighbors." He took the case. He wouldn't let me pay him, saying it was the last favor he owed an old friend. That day marked the beginning of our new life. The bunker was no longer just a shelter. It became our base of operations. The fight for the land gave us a reason to be there, a purpose that rooted us to the soil. We weren't just surviving anymore, we were building. We started with the old cabin. It was a wreck, but the foundation was solid. Using the money from the safe, we bought lumber, tools, and roofing materials. Mr. Vance helped us find a local contractor, an honest old guy who had also been pushed around by Pioneer and was happy to help us for a fair price. He taught me how to frame a wall, how to run wiring, how to install insulation. My hands, once soft, became calloused and capable. While I worked on the cabin, Maya took over the land. She read our grandfather's books on local botany and started a small garden, tilling the rocky soil and coaxing life from it. She planted vegetables, herbs, and wildflowers. She brought a sense of beauty and order to the wildness. her own quiet way of fighting back against the chaos that had been our lives. The legal battle with Pioneer dragged on for months. They sent lawyers in fancy suits who tried to intimidate me. They sent letters with new, higher offers. They tried to bury us in paperwork. But with Mr. Vance guiding us, we held firm. We had the truth on our side, and we had our grandfather's legacy. We weren't just fighting for 10 acres of land anymore. We were fighting for him. During this time, we became part of the Pine Ridge community in a way I never thought possible. Word got around about the 2 kids in the hills taking on the big development company. People who had been suspicious of us at first started to nod when we came into town. The woman at the general store would slip an extra apple into our bag. The contractor would leave leftover materials for us to use. We learned that our grandfather had been a quiet legend in these parts, the old man who wouldn't sell, who wouldn't be bullied. By taking up his fight, we had inherited his reputation. Finally, after almost a year, Pioneer Development folded. Faced with the evidence in our grandfather's file and the prospect of a class-action lawsuit from the other families Mr. Vance had contacted, they offered a settlement. It wasn't just about our land. They agreed to a multi-million-dollar fund to compensate the other families they had forced out over the years. And for us, they offered to buy the water rights to the spring for a sum that was, frankly, astronomical. But the deal came with conditions we dictated. The land itself would remain ours, in perpetuity, protected by a conservation easement. And they had to fund a new well and water system for the town of Pine Ridge, which had been struggling with water issues for years. Mr. Vance advised us to take the deal. It was more than a victory. It was justice. The day the papers were signed, I was 18 years old. A year to the day since Mark had closed that door on us. I stood on the porch of our newly rebuilt cabin. It wasn't big, but it was solid, filled with light, and every board had been placed with our own hands. From the porch, you could see the whole valley, and in the morning, you could watch the sun rise over the mountains. Maya was tending to her garden, humming a quiet tune. We weren't the same people who had stumbled up this hill a year ago, lost and terrified. The world had thrown its worst at us, and we had not only survived, we had built something new from the wreckage. The bunker was still there, of course, a silent concrete heart beneath the earth. We didn't use it anymore, but we maintained it. It was a part of our story. A reminder that sometimes you have to go deep into the darkness to find your way back to the light. Our grandfather had left us more than land or money. He had left us a lesson. Home isn't a place you are given. It's a place you make. It's a place you fight for. It's the ground you refuse to surrender. The bunker didn't save us. The choice to come out of it did. The choice to stand our ground, to fight for something more than just our own survival. That's what truly gave us a home. We had found our place to watch the sunrise. This journey taught me that your past doesn't have to be a prison. The worst moments of your life can become the foundation for your greatest strengths. It's not about the hand you're dealt. It's about how you play it. It's about finding that one thing worth fighting for. That one piece of ground you'll stand on, no matter what. If our story means something to you, if you believe in second chances and the power of fighting for what you believe in, hit that subscribe button. This channel is a community for people who have been through it and come out stronger on the other side. And please, share a piece of your own story in the comments below. What does home mean to you? What's the ground you've stood for in your own life? I promise I read every single one. Thank you for listening. You're not alone.